Hello, jewelry lover. My name is Bella Naiman, and I'm the founder of New York City Jewelry Week. Welcome to this virtual program, part of NYCJW 24. The theme for the 7th annual edition is Wander and Wander, and it reflects the multifaceted nature of jewelry as both art and personal expression. Wander captures the awe-inspiring craftsmanship behind each piece, the dazzling, delicate, or bold details that turn your head in admiration. Wander invites you to explore the wonderful and wild creative journeys behind the jewelry. It's not just about the finished piece, it's about the adventure it took to get there. Designers experiment, push boundaries, and play with ideas and materials. And this year, New York City Jewelry Week takes participants to see it all unfold. Every necklace, ring, and bracelet is a passport to a new world where innovation reigns and imagination knows no limit. So we hope that these programs will take you on that journey and are your passport as well. Sit back, enjoy, and while these are not live, we welcome your comments. So please don't hesitate to drop us a line, whether it's email or Instagram, or even get in touch with some of the incredible curators, artists, writers that have really worked very hard to bring you this program. So thanks very much. And we also hope to see you out in New York. Bye.
So, good evening from Singapore. My name is Richa Goyal Sikri, and I am delighted to be a part of the New York Jewelry Week. So, shout out to the organizers. Thank you for including me in your program this year. I'm a journalist, I'm a storyteller, and I recently published this book that you see on your screen in front of you. It's called No Stone Unturned, The Hunt for African Gems. And so before I delve deeper into the book and African gem deposits, I want to give a quick introduction about myself so you know why you're talking to this crazy person on the screen right now, or why you're listening to this person on the screen right now. So as I said before, I actually originally am not from the gem and jewelry industry. So I spent 20 years in a very corporate travel and tourism sector. And like most people in this industry, I fell in love with colored gemstones. And this love and this interest in gemology and in the industry in general brought me to Sri Lanka in 2014 when I visited my first sapphire mine. And the photograph you see on the screen is from that visit. And so from 2014 till 2017, I would say, I was still working in the travel and tourism industry, but visiting different mines, manufacturing centers, and just trying to understand colored gemstones and the whole mine to market journey of a precious stone. Long story short, I started documenting my experiences on Instagram and became a journalist as editors found me through Instagram. So I'm clearly an Instagram poster child in that sense. But let's jump over now to why I am here and what am I going to talk about. So in 2020, when we were all sort of locked up in our respective homes in different parts of the world, by that time I'd already left the travel and tourism industry behind and was working actively in the industry as a journalist and as a storyteller. Something interesting started happening in the world. We were cut off from each other. We were not traveling. We were pulled out of our daily routines. And there was a sense of morality that hung in the air. What I want to share with you now in this presentation is how this book came about. What was the genesis of this project? I spent 4 years writing and researching for this book. It's a collection of 24 short adventure stories, and each story is based on real people and their real life experiences, all of them related to colored gemstones from Africa. So, why Africa? And why was this book even commissioned? The book was commissioned in 2020 by colored gemstone mining company called Gemfields. And the reason and the original brief was that when the pandemic happened, you know, today, if you look at colored gemstones in the marketplace, 80%, approximately 80% of colored gemstones that are being mined and traded come from the African continent. And what is interesting about African gem deposits is that they were almost all of them discovered in the last 15 to 60 years only. And the people who are either responsible or who were associated with the discovery and with the development of some of the notable deposits, you know, some of them, we started losing them to COVID in 2020. And while the scientific elements related to these gem deposits have been well documented in articles by GIA, GEMA, and other publications, the human stories have never really been told. So the objective of this book was to document these human stories, these untold human stories related to Africa's notable gem deposits. And to do it with this realization that if it's not done in a few decades, if not a few years, we as a generation and future generations would completely lose these very vital elements of the gem industry's history, and specifically the African gemstone history. So that was the original brief. And the original deadline was 1 year. But as I delved deeper into this project, I realized that this book and this project just became bigger and bigger and bigger. And I didn't just want to document stories which were from the perspective of international gem merchants or international gemologists and geologists who have had a huge impact on African gemstones. But I also wanted to capture stories that came from indigenous people who were native to the land. So finding authentic stories and doing the secondary research is what took up a lot of time. The image in front of you is a rough Mozambique ruby, and I took this photograph, I think, in 2018. And just imagine a rough ruby that comes out of the ground in the shape of the African continent. I mean, isn't Mother Nature just incredible? So when I started work on this book, there were Gemfields put two conditions in front of me. The first condition was that no diamonds, only colored gemstones. And the second was only Africa. And other than that, I had free reign to shape this project as I saw fit. And but there were many challenges that came along the way. One of the challenges, for example, was one of the contributors to a story didn't speak any English. And he and I spent 6 months exchanging emails back and forth. He was from Madagascar. He's a gemstone cutter in Antananarivo. And he would send me emails in Malagasy, which I would then translate into English, write a reply in English, translate it into Malagasy, and send it back to him. And we did this for 6 months till I could find enough material to write a story. And so while each story is a true story, there are fictional elements that have been included in all the stories. And those fictional elements have typically been put in terms of dialogue, in terms of scene setting, in terms of certain characters. Names, most of the names are the real names. A few names have been changed to protect the identity of those individuals, and wherever a name has been changed, it has been indicated in the book. And each book, each story, at the end of each story, there's also an author's note that is penned by me, which tells you that, more about the character once the story finishes. And every author's note is different. Some are small, some are a page or two, and there's no standard template. They all are sort of organically different, as you will discover hopefully when you delve deeper into the book. So before we start with the stories, I want to talk a little bit about Africa. And this infographic in front of you paints a perfect picture to talk about formation versus discovery. Now, if you look on the screen, right on top, you will see that emeralds from South Africa were formed 2.9 billion years ago. Emeralds in Zimbabwe were formed 2.6 billion years ago. Zambian emeralds were formed around 550 million years ago. So just imagine that all these emeralds from these different deposits in Africa, as an example, were underneath the ground upon which dinosaurs were walking on the African continent. But they were only discovered in the early part of the 20th century. Whereas Colombian emeralds, which are significantly younger, relatively younger in comparison to African, were discovered much earlier. And so it's just an interesting sort of thing to wrap your head around. And when we talk about discovery of gemstones in Africa, now, of course, we know that, I'll go back here so that we are not distracted by the map. But of course, we know that gemstones have been extracted, mined, traded on the African continent since the time of Cleopatra. But if we take that period of antiquity and we park that aside and we focus on the contemporary period related to gem discovery, the gems were discovered in 3 waves. The first wave happened during the colonization of Africa, also known as the Scramble for Africa, when colonial powers from France, from Great Britain, from Portugal, Spain, Germany, came down to the African continent and sort of started divvying the continent up amongst themselves. And with these colonial powers, geologists, gemologists, miners, experts came to the continent as well, and they mapped the mineral resources of Africa, of course, for personal gain and for the gain of the colonial powers. But what this landed up doing was it landed up creating a repository of incredible research related to Africa's mineral wealth. And so the second wave of discovery of gemstones actually happened once these countries started gaining independence after World War II. So in the 60s, in the 70s, and this book, the book that I've written, you're not going to find any stories in this book about some queen in Europe who had this incredible emerald necklace, and because she had this necklace, you should buy an emerald. No, this book doesn't deal with any of that type of history. It is a book that is focused on untold stories from independent Africa and from that period. And each story is chronologically arranged. So the earliest story is actually set in 1968. And I was also surprised during my secondary research to discover that African nations gained independence quite late in comparison to some of the other countries around the world after Second World War. So the third wave, we're in the middle of the third wave of discovery of gemstones as of now. So before we look at Africa, let's now switch gears and go back in time to a little German town called Idar Oberstein. and to the 1400s. Now, for almost 4 to 500 years, this little town in Germany was the global hub for colored gemstone mining and cutting. And when they started running out of gemstone deposits in the mountains of Oberstein or the mountains surrounding Oberstein, and or it became too expensive to mine, the same gem cutters and miners started exploring the world. They first went to Brazil looking for colored gemstones and rough colored gemstones that they could bring back to Oberstein to cut and polish because they had the expertise. And then they arrived in Africa. This incredible sculpture that you see on the screen is a heliodor carved by Hen. And I mean, just look at the incredible detailing where we can see the rough heliodor, and we see this frog emerging from the rough. And this brings me to the first story in the book, Tea for Tourmaline. It's set in Madagascar. It's 1968. And the person I want you to focus on is this tall gentleman here. It's the story of Julius Pesch. Now, some of you seasoned people in the industry would have heard of the name of Julius Pesch, but most may not have heard. Julius Pesch is a legend in the industry, and he in 1968 was this young man who was on his second or third trip to Madagascar. He, on his previous trips to Madagascar, had purchased a rough emerald sitting next to a sack of potatoes in the vegetable market. And through Julius's eyes, we are pulled into this world of Madagascar and Antananarivo in the 60s and how things were. So this first story is actually a treasure hunt. Now, during this presentation, I'm not actually going to do a book reading because you should read the book to read the stories. But what I'm going to try and do is to share exclusive insights and to share photographs that are not in the book, like the photographs you see on the screen are actually not in the book. And this story, it's a fun, lovely story. It's full of humor and culture. And that was the other thing that I wanted to really bring out, because when we think of Africa content that exists today, you either have like stuff like Blood Diamond, or you have National Geographic, or you have the Disney version. There's nothing really in between. And this tries to bridge that gap and is like a colored gemstone. It's a natural, organic product. And I think the best way to describe the tone of the stories in the book would be a cross between Indiana Jones and maybe P.G. Wodehouse. So not to say that I have written it like P.G. Wodehouse. But so we're drawn into this world in Madagascar with Julius, and he comes across a map, and and begins a quest for a hidden gemstone deposit. And this grumpy looking elderly gentleman over here in the corner helps him find that deposit. And the key element that clinched the deal was basically a barrel of red wine. So you have to read more to learn about what happens with Julius Pesch and his quest. Jumping eras from 1968 to the early 80s in Kenya, the third, I think, story in the book is called Scorpions and Raiders. And it is a story centered around this man, Daudi Osman, and the Range Rover behind. But the story is told from the perspective and from the point of view of his son, this young little boy sitting over here, Naushad, who's around 10 or 11 years old when he's visiting his father's aquamarine mine. And we follow Naushad over a period of 24 hours as he gets into trouble, gets out of trouble, and witnesses all sorts of shenanigans happening at this mining location. And I think what I've also tried to do with these stories is that, yes, they're humorous, they're funny, and they're easy to read, and they pull you in. So basically, what we are trying to do is follow Noshad around, and the circumstances and the context of that period in Kenya, in that part of Kenya, there were really difficult times. I mean, you can see from this photograph, a lot of these miners were mining in areas, and of course, that is still true to a large extent, but they were mining in these very remote locations where they had no access to medical care, no access to water. They were really left to fend for themselves, and there was no protection from no police protection or anyone that they could rely on. And so you get a sense of what Kenya was like during this period, and what were some of the challenges and some of the things that these miners and these pioneers used to deal with. But it's all sort of set in a very told in a very sort of culturally rich narrative. I'm going to take a sip of my little cup of tea here so that I still have my voice. One of my, I mean, I know you're supposed to have only one favorite, but one of my top gemstones is Savarite. And for those of you who don't know what is a Savarite, indulge me for a second. Savarite is basically a garnet. It's a grossular green garnet. And what's incredible about a garnet, and specifically Savarite, is that garnets share are part of the same crystal structure as that of a diamond. So they have an identical crystal structure to that of a diamond, which is why their light dispersion is so incredible. But they are colored green. Savarite in particular is colored green like emerald by trace elements like chromium. And so I call Savarite the love child of an emerald and a diamond. The story that is documented in this book is about a man called Campbell Bridges, who was responsible for discovering Savarite not once, not twice, but 3 times. And he is considered the father of Savarite. So let me tell you 1 or 2 stories which are not in the book. So most people credit Campbell Bridges for discovering Savarite in 1967. Actually, he discovered Savarite in 1961. He was working as a geologist. He's a Scottish geologist, and he was working in Rhodesia, which is present-day Zimbabwe, and went exploring one weekend a particular set of hills, and came across, as he was walking around, he got chased by this water buffalo and jumped into a ravine to save himself. And in that ravine, he discovered these shiny green stones embedded in these rocks. And he pulled some of them out. But before he could do anything about it or try and figure out what they were, he was transferred to Tanzania. And then in 1967, he discovers the same garnets in Tanzania. But unfortunately, there's a regime change, and he has to leave the country overnight. And he traces the mineral vein of Savarite from Tanzania into Kenya and establishes a mining operation. And once he has a certain amount of rough grossular green garnets in his hand, he takes them to Henry B. Platt of Tiffany & Co. And Henry B. Platt falls in love with these gemstones. He's like, they're fantastic. I love them. They're, everything that one could hope for, but we can't sell it. And he said, why? Why can't you sell these stones? He said, because no one is going to buy stones which are called grossular green garnets. So we need to give these stones a new name. And Campbell Bridges, his wife, suggests, why don't you call it Campbellite, since you discovered the stone? And Henry B. Platt invites Campbell Bridges to name the stone. And he says, No, Kenya is our home. This is where we are raising our family, and we're mining outside National Park. So I want to call it Savarite as an homage to Kenya and as an homage to Savo National Park. And that is the origin story of the name Savarite. And for the rest of it, you will have to read the story in the book. And it's, again, a story full of drama because Campbell Bridges was not just a geologist, a miner, a merchant. He was also an environmentalist, and he used to work very closely with the protection services to help track down poachers. And so the story opens with this chase in the bush where he's running after this gang of poachers who are armed, whereas Bridges is not. And and the adventures that follow during from 1987 to 2014. Now, I know there's a diamond on the screen there, but I want to talk a little bit about origin and how it impacts the perception of value, how it impacts real value, how it impacts storytelling, how it impacts sales and marketing. So, for 2000 years, India was the only source of diamonds in the world. And in the early 1700s, I think it was 1734, if I'm not mistaken, diamonds were discovered in Brazil. And when this happened, European merchants who had been sitting at that time on stocks of Indian diamonds got worried that these diamonds that were pouring into Europe from Brazil were going to impact the value of the diamonds that they had paid high prices for from India. So they spreaded rumors saying that, these Brazilian diamonds are of inferior quality and only the diamonds from India are the collectible, good quality diamonds. So, interestingly, the Portuguese were the colonial masters of Brazil at that time. And the Portuguese were also the colonial masters of a little place on the west coast of India called Goa. And Goa at this time was famous not for being a beach destination as we know it now, but it was famous for being a global hub for precious stone trading. The Portuguese would bring Colombian emeralds that they had acquired from the Spanish to Goa and sell them to the Mughal emperors, to other kings and queens of India, and bring back diamonds from India to Europe. And so when this rumor was started, the Portuguese were like, okay, no problem. They took the diamonds from Brazil, brought them to Goa, and sold those same Brazilian diamonds to the same European merchants as diamonds from India. And that kind of is I find that to be a very interesting story when it comes to origin. And that is also, and I tell this story because this is what has also been happening with African gemstones. Even today, you have sapphires which are taken, some would say smuggled, from Madagascar to Sri Lanka and sold as Sri Lankan sapphires. Paraiba tourmalines are another example, or so many other stones that have been taken from Africa, mixed with layouts and parcels of stones from the more well-established and better known origins, and just sold under that better known brand name of origin. And I want to talk about a story which really underlines this phenomena in the industry. It's called Paraiba Like, and it's the story of origin. It's the story of this man. And again, these photos, you won't see them in the book, but this man, his name is Musa Konate. And the story spans Mozambique, Guinea, Nigeria, USA, and it starts in 98 and finishes around 2003. And Musa Konate was the first person to really realize that these tourmalines, one of the first to realize that the tourmalines coming out of Mozambique could be heated and turned to that elusive, electric, neon blue-green Paraiba tourmaline color. And while a lot of people, when Paraiba tourmalines came out of Mozambique, or copper-bearing tourmalines as they were known at that time, while a lot of people took these tourmalines and mixed them with layouts of Brazilian tourmalines, Paraiba tourmalines, and sold them as Paraiba tourmalines from Brazil, Musa Konate, and of course there was a pricing difference, that's why it was done. But Musa Konate was determined to sell the tourmalines under the Mozambique flag, and lobbied to really raise the profile of this deposit. And so we learn about the struggles that, his struggles during this process, and we also learn about some of his personal history and some of the things that he experienced. And I think the reason why it's interesting is because his story could also be applied to other people in similar situations coming from Africa. And now I want to talk about a land called Kajem. I'm going to take another sip quickly, because I feel like I'm losing my voice a little bit. Now, this photograph, I took this photograph, I think, in 2018, July 2018. It's a Zambian emerald. And when I learned about gem fields for the first time, and when I learned about Zambian emeralds, I used to think the Kajem Emerald Mine in Zambia is the world's largest emerald mine today. And I used to think that the story of that mine began with gem fields in 2007. And but in reality, that emerald deposit in the Kafubu Emerald Fields, as I discovered, is significantly older. And you can see some of these dates on the screen. 1928, before Zambia got its independence, the first company that was established for exploration was the Rhodesia-Congo Border Concession Company in 1928. The 40s and 50s in that area, the Kafubu Emerald Fields, which borders Congo, was spent in exploration of the deposit with not much luck. And in 1963, the first mining license was registered actually by Rio Tinto. Yes, the same Rio Tinto as diamonds. But again, they didn't have much of a production. And in 64, Zambia got its independence. And the Miku mine, which was then taken over by the government, was the first emerald mine in 1964. But the 60s and the 70s, during this period, the Zambian government kind of lost control over the Kafubu Emerald Fields and established a restricted zone to try and curtail some of the smuggling that was happening, because at that time, people could just come to the Kafubu Emerald Fields and just dig with basic shovels, and they would be able to literally pull from the ground incredible rough emeralds. And and because of that, theft was rampant. And then these stones were just taken across the border to Congo, and without any export, any taxes, and Zambia was losing its source of income from these incredible minerals. This is a really special story because I interviewed a man who was responsible for establishing the Kajem Emerald Mine in the early 80s in collaboration with the Zambian government. And that's this gentleman here that you see. His name was Shiv Shankar Gupta. And I interviewed him in 2020 when he was 95 years old. It took me a few months to find him, get someone to introduce us, and to convince him to share some of his story. He unfortunately passed away in March of 2021. And I then sought the help of his family members who really helped me to complete the story. Now, while the focus is on the Kajim Emerald Mine and on Zambia, his story actually related to emeralds began earlier. And the photograph that you see here is of the Gravelot Emerald Mine from South Africa. And he was responsible. Now, just to give you some context, he owned the Gravelot Emerald Mine in the 60s and 70s in South Africa, when South Africa was ruled by a white minority government, and he being an Indian. So the story opens with him arriving in Johannesburg airport, and normally he would land in Johannesburg, take a small plane to get to the mine. The mine had its own runway, but on this occasion, the plane is not working, and he has to now drive through the countryside, which is not the most ideal situation given the cultural context of what South Africa was at that time, especially for an Indian man. And so we follow Shiv Shankar Gupta. First, we get a sense of his adventures related to emeralds in South Africa. And then he's also known as the father of the emerald industry in Jaipur. Because before Gravelot, there were maybe 10, 12 families in Jaipur who were cutting and polishing emeralds. And they all came from a very elite Jain community. But Shiv Shankar Gupta was not from this community. He came from a mercantile community in Jaipur. And the Gravelot Emerald Mine was more about quantity than quality. I mean, I've seen some fantastic emeralds from the Gravelot, from this mine, but it was really more about quantity. And Gupta needed the industry to absorb this massive tons of rough emeralds that he was bringing to Jaipur. So he started giving emeralds on credit to people who were not from the industry. He was responsible for importing emerald cutting machines into Jaipur, on giving people rough emeralds on credit. And these were people who were like, restaurant owners or traders. They were not traditionally from the emerald industry. So he democratized the emerald cutting and polishing business. And because of that, today there are a few 100,000 people involved in every aspect of the colored gemstone industry in Jaipur. And 95% of Zambian emeralds are today cut and polished in Jaipur. And so many credit him for this development and this expansion of the emerald industry in India and in Jaipur. And so for that and for many other reasons, as you'll see when you read the story, it's a special story for me. The other significant deposit, both Zambian emeralds, both the discovery of emeralds in Zambia and the discovery of rubies in Mozambique, has really transformed and had a huge impact on the gem and jewelry industry at large. And I mean, to give you some sense, I think probably 60 to 70% of all rubies on planet Earth that are mined and traded come from Mozambique today. It's the number one deposit in the world. And if you Google when were rubies discovered in Mozambique, you'll probably get 2009 as an answer on Google. But actually, it's even earlier than 2009. It's 2008. And there are two stories in this book. One set in 2008, Mama Roni goes to Mozambique. And the second one related to the 2009 discovery in a different deposit nearby in Mozambique called Ruby Land. And the reason why I called this story Ruby Land is because traditionally, historically, Ruby Land has always been Mogok in Burma. And I think I picked this title specifically to say that it's changed. It's no longer the case, and it's the contemporary deposits in Mozambique, which are now the prolific deposits. And I think a deposit like this has never really been found ever in the history of humankind. So it's a roller coaster story. Both stories are will really challenge you and challenge your preconceived notions of what your perception may be or may, and I hope it provides you with some fresh perspectives related to Mozambique, related to rubies, and gives you a fresh sort of view on how incredibly difficult and impossible it is to bring these gifts of Mother Nature from underneath the ground, where they have been for hundreds of millions of years, to like a little piece of jewelry on our finger. So the book is out. It's been out. It was published in July of this year. It's available in North America on Amazon, and it's also available on Barnes and Noble. So 24 short stories. And if you want to learn more about the book, or if you have any questions, if you've already got a copy of the book and you've started reading it, and if you have any questions, please feel free to look for me on Instagram. My handle is on the screen, and I would be happy to answer any of your questions. And thank you again to the New York Jewelry Week for providing me with this opportunity to talk about this project, which is incredibly dear to my heart. And I hope you enjoy the book, and I hope you found this session to be interesting and illuminating. Thank you.